I know you've been going through this law line for line. We're all trying to understand the implications of it. What, for you, are the most significant changes that will result from this piece of legislation?
Well, to me, the most significant change, I guess, is the amount of mainland Chinese influence that it inserts into the legal process in Hong Kong. People can look all they want at what the wording of the law says, the substantive crimes. But in the end, what matters is there an institution out there that cares what the words say, that's going to make what they say matter? In Hong Kong so far, right, up till now, we've had an independent judiciary which does care about what words say. And so it makes sense to wonder about what the words say. Now, we are going, this whole national security law, offenses under the law, will be first investigated, then prosecuted, and finally judged by a system in which the PRC has very significant influence over appointments. They had even established under the law a body called the National Security Office, which is not a Hong Kong body at all. It's a mainland Chinese body which operates in Hong Kong and can, at will, take jurisdiction over any case and have the person taken to the mainland, tried in mainland courts under Chinese criminal procedure law and presumably imprisoned in the mainland. They can do all that if they want.
Are there changes that businesses operating in Hong Kong should be making now to ensure that they are compliant with this law?
Well, that's the problem. It's very hard to know when one is compliant and when one is not. Presumably, at some point, we will understand where the new lines are being drawn. But, one cannot tell where the lines are being drawn just by looking at the law. So, for example, early on, the law says that the provisions of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which is under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, part of Hong Kong domestic law. This national security law says that people's rights under that law will be respected. But as we have seen already on the very first day of operation in the law, the police have banners announcing that if you shout slogans advocating Hong Kong independence, which is pure free speech that is protected under the ICCPR. The police are saying if you shout these slogans, you will be arrested and punished under the national security law. So it's really hard to say what people should be doing. Certainly, I think the desired and quite deliberate effect of the law is to scare some word that I probably can't say on TV, to scare the something out of people and make them be extremely cautious because really we just don't know how far the Hong Kong authorities and the PRC authorities will go.
And Donald, you mentioned this law. We've talked about how this extends to actions committed by anyone, whether you're in Hong Kong or not, whether you're a Hong Kong resident or not. This also pertains to foreign nationals as well. This brings up the question of extraterritorial jurisdiction, which some in the legal or non-legal committee might not know what it exactly means. What would that actually entail now?
Okay, so that's another kind of troubling aspect of the law, which is that it criminalizes activity undertaken by foreigners, outside of Hong Kong. Now, we can find examples of this in the laws of other countries. For example, you could have, under many countries, competition laws. I think you could probably commit a crime if you conspire in Europe to price fix for export to the United States, perhaps, under U.S. competition law. So, in principle, it's not necessarily unknown. What is unusual about the Hong Kong law is that it goes beyond even what mainland Chinese criminal law provides. So under mainland Chinese criminal law, if you're a foreigner and you're outside of China, you cannot be liable for a crime under the Chinese criminal law unless the punishment is over 3 years imprisonment and if it's a crime in the place where you did it. So therefore, if you're in Canada, you're writing an op-ed advocating Hong Kong independence, that would be a crime in China, but it's not a crime if you do it in Canada. However, that is now a crime under Hong Kong law. because Hong Kong law does not have that limitation that mainland Chinese law does. So anybody, really, a professor in a class, a student in a class, somebody writing an op-ed, anybody who says something, for example, long live free Hong Kong. I'm saying that now, sitting here in Washington, D.C. I could now be prosecuted for that in Hong Kong.
Donald, our team has been speaking with some legal experts like yourself as well, and they say that some countries, and most countries actually, when it comes to extradition clauses, they do have exceptions for political offenses. So could any requests made from China and Hong Kong be rejected?
Yes, I think so. I don't know a lot about extradition law, so I would go with what the other experts told you, but that's certainly my understanding, that a lot of extradition treaties do have these exceptions for political offenses. And therefore, if the defendant can argue that it's a political offense, then of course, they wouldn't be extradited. But again, what it comes down to is the defendant in a country that's friendly to China and wants to do what China says, or are they in a country that is, has the capacity to stand up to a Chinese request? Because again, it doesn't really matter so much what the words say. And China can say, this is not a political offense, this is a national security offense. And if the country, wants to believe it, then they will. We've seen examples of countries, for example, in Central Asia, that have, extradited what are clearly, political offenses. They've extradited people for what are clearly political offenses to China, notwithstanding the fact that their extradition treaty probably had an exception for political offenses.
Professor, another component of this law that jumped out for many was the inclusion of this Article 60, which makes officials from the mainland who are operating in Hong Kong under this law and prosecuting this law immune from Hong Kong law. Would that effectively give them carte blanche to pursue whatever tactics they want to pursue without the threat of judicial or legal oversight? What are the implications of that article, do you think?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting article and very troubling because it has all the implications that you suggest. Of course, as a practical matter, it's very hard to imagine that the police would be brought to book. There's many democratic countries where it's hard to bring the police to book for abuses, and it's really, really, really hard in China to bring the police to book for abuses. What's really interesting about this is that the police, it says here, members of this National Security Office, when they're on the job, they are, not subject to Hong Kong law, completely immune from Hong Kong law. The interesting thing is they are also not subject to PRC law when they're in Hong Kong, because PRC law generally does not apply in Hong Kong. For example, the criminal law of the PRC does not apply in Hong Kong. So the laws against murder of mainland China don't apply in Hong Kong. The laws against murder in Hong Kong don't apply to these people when they're in Hong Kong. So it's hard to see how any law against, murder, arson, rape, kidnapping, none of those laws, it seems, would apply to these people in Hong Kong, which is pretty remarkable.
So, Donald, that leads me to my last question. What areas can Hong Kong still maintain its autonomy?
Under this law, that's the issue. If someone wants to advocate for Hong Kong having more autonomy in some area or retaining its autonomy in some area other than in, national security, obviously that could become very dangerous for that person. So Hong Kong will have, I guess, exactly as much autonomy as the PRC authorities decide it should have, which, of course, is no autonomy at all. So I think that's why a lot of people are saying this is really the end of one country, two systems. And I think that's probably, unfortunately, correct.